And I showed you at the beginning of this lecture that long list of different kinds of lending facilities, okay? And here they all are. Here they all are, okay? Because this is the asset side of the balance sheet of the Fed. So all of these things are loans. These are loans that the Fed is making. And here's how it's financing these loans, by expanding the liability side, by expanding its deposits. I remind you that this is Bear Stearns, this vertical line here, and this is Lehman AIG here. And you can see the stages of the crisis, okay? Before Bear Stearns, if you look at what the Fed was doing, it was just moving the Fed funds rate. In the months since August, it moved the Fed funds rate from 5% down to 2%, okay? So the first thing it tried to do was it responded with elasticity, right? It's lowering the Fed funds rate. It's trying to make it more profitable for banks to take on liquidity risk and so forth. It's trying to support asset prices indirectly by lowering the Fed funds rate. But then Bear Stearns failed, okay? And that wasn't enough anymore. And so then they got a little more aggressive. They sold off these treasury bills. This is about $1 trillion of the treasury bills. They sold off 500 billion of them and lent the proceeds to brokers, dealers, and everyone else who was in need. That was the second attempt, okay? And then came Lehman AIG, and things got worse still. And they took the money market onto their own balance sheet, okay? They created their, a $2 trillion more of deposit at the Fed and $2 trillion more of lending on the Fed. The interbank market broke down, and the Fed became the interbank market. Okay, if nobody trusted each other. They all trusted the Fed. So any money that was flowing through the Fed. You deposited surplus entities deposited at the Fed, and deficit entities borrowed from the Fed. This aqua thing is mortgage-backed securities. That's a later stage where it starts to intervene in the capital market itself and buy mortgage-backed securities. We'll leave that out for the moment. I now want to just do in balance sheets and show you what the Fed did, how to understand these different stages of response to crisis. Okay? So I started the lecture by saying that the city sieve looked like this. There was residential mortgage-backed securities here, and there was asset-backed commercial paper here as the funding source. Okay? And that and I'm going to put city here, and I'm going to put a money market mutual fund here. Okay? And I'm going to put the Fed here. What started this crisis off, okay, this asset-backed commercial paper is being held as an asset by a money market mutual fund, okay? And there are shares here, okay? So there are international investors or something that's holding here. And all of this is fine. Citi's not in there. This is off balance sheet for Citi. It's not anywhere in the Fed's balance sheet or anything like that. Okay? So the first stage of the crisis, it looked maybe like a normal crisis. Okay? That money market mutual funds started to worry about the value of the underlying asset, residential mortgage-backed securities, and they said, I would just assume, not renew this and get some other kind of funding going. If you don't mind, okay? And so Citi did this, and they thought this was good business. They thought they were going to make money doing this. Remember, dealers are not in this, to make the world a nice place. They're trying to make profits, okay? And what did they think how did they think they were going to make a profit? They thought they could make a profit by replacing. I'm not going to do all these subtractions. I'm just going to cross them out. Okay. When this matured, they replaced that funding with a loan from Citibank. So Citibank said, we think those are really good securities. We're happy to take them as security ourselves, okay, against a loan, okay? And then we will fund that loan on our own balance sheet, let's say even with a repurchase agreement. Okay. The point being, so that goes away and now it's a repurchase agreement. Well, there's still this underlying security here is the collateral for this, but on the other hand, now this repurchase agreement is a liability of Citibank, and so you have further recourse, that if this asset turns out not to be worth enough to pay this back, then you have recourse against Citibank, and Citibank has a big balance sheet, and so you have a little more security, and so fine. Okay, but then you start to worry a little bit more about that security, and you say, you know what, Citibank, I don't really like, you might say to me, okay, fine, you keep the mortgage-backed security and we're done. I don't really want that to be so, okay? I would rather actually have commercial paper from you. That's your unsecured liability, okay, of Citibank that is based on your whole asset book, everything, okay, commercial paper. Let's just call this maybe Lehman too, because remember we were talking about Lehman issuing all of this unsecured commercial paper that was bought by the primary reserve fund, right? So a number of these big banks were in this business, okay? And when their off-balance sheet deals started to come unwound, they saw profit opportunity. They said, let us take this off the balance sheet of the customers that don't want to hold it anymore and hold it ourselves and charge for that. And this will wind up, we're going to make money. We want to do this, okay? And so no one was holding a gun to their head. They said, this is good business. Let's do this. Unsecured commercial paper here. Or if you are or another possibility might be the Eurodollar market, if you're a foreigner. Because money market mutual funds also invest in paper that's issued by foreign banks here, the Eurodollar market. All of this stuff happened. If you look at the flow of funds, you see that this was happening. There was a replacement of a certain kind of funding and then you got the traditional banking system sort of involved. Now these traditional banks are of course backstopped by the Fed and the FDIC, okay, in ways that these SIVs were not, okay. So the collapse of the shadow banking system happened in stages. It happened first, it collapsed onto the traditional banking system. And the money market mutual fund said, well, that's fine, I'm happy to do business with you because you have a backstop, okay, and that makes me happy. Except that that wasn't the end of the story, okay? It continued to get worse, and it particularly continued to get worse for the European banks that were doing these sorts of SIVs because they didn't have at all the kind of backstops that domestic banks in the US have. They don't have as much access to the Fed. So when the money market mutual funds said, you know what, I know I lent you that Eurodollar money for a week, but now the week is up and I would like not to roll that over anymore. The European banks are in trouble. Where are they going to get dollar funding? Where are they going to get dollar funding? Okay, and this is where the Fed stepped in, okay, with the Treasury too. Okay. And what they did was liquidity swaps with foreign central banks, so we should have foreign central banks here too, and the Treasury got involved, holding Treasury bills, so that the money market mutual fund could replace all of this dodgy stuff with Treasury bills. That's what they wanted anyway. Okay, fine. We got Treasury bills, and now this is a liquidity swap that is a loan from the ECB, let's say. So there are various stages here, and so now let me return to here. So you can sort of see these stages happening. This element here, this sort of orange bit, that's $600 billion of liquidity swaps. That's at the peak of the crisis. That's what's happening. And this brown thing here, what is that? Treasury supplemental account. That's basically, there was the Treasury had deposits at the Fed, and then they issued T-bills out the other side. So I'm consolidating the Fed and the Treasury balance sheet here, because otherwise we'd have go length of the room here. But the point was to give money market mutual funds what they wanted, Treasury bills, okay, and to give European banks the funding they needed, which was dollar funding that was channeled through central bank channels because the money markets were closed down. So this is a sequence from a normal crisis and an attempt to absorb this crisis in a normal way by just letting prices move a little bit in order to have an incentive for the normal banking system to take over, okay? But it wasn't enough. The crisis got worse, and it exceeded their ability to absorb this. The Fed tried to help them in the way that the Fed normally tries to help them, by lowering the Fed funds rate, okay? Okay? That wasn't enough. The Fed started then to intervene in this way, okay, to enter into the term funding market, okay? That's what you're seeing there, okay, with the liquidity swaps and lending directly to dealers. This is all the term facilities, all of that is acting as a backstop to this market, not just this market, okay? So they're moving up, or moving down the hierarchy, if you will, okay, from the best money to now backstopping directly the banks, not just lending them money, but being the value investor, okay? And eventually, they backstop the mortgage-backed security market, which is that aquamarine thing there. So they, as the crisis kept getting worse, they moved farther and farther, and they moved more and more of the financial system onto their balance sheet, okay? At no point, I'm sure this is right, at no point did they want to do any of this. Central bankers are a conservative lot, okay? They certainly don't want to take any credit risk. They don't want to take any interest rate risk. They don't want to take any risk, you know? That's why their money is the best money, okay? They're not, in general, taking risk. In a crisis, though, lend freely, okay, at a high rate against what would be good security in a normal time. That's basically what they did. There's a little bit of a difference because you're dealing with asset markets that are long-term, which Bagehot was sort of not. I started this lecture by talking about normal monetary policy, just messing with the Fed funds rate and having some effects on asset prices indirectly. What the Fed does gets transmitted to the rest of the economy by these profit-maximizing dealers and markets and arbitrage and all of this. So the Fed is sort of at a distance from the market. It's messing with the overnight Fed funds rate, and everything else just sort of happens with other people interacting with each other. The Fed is sort of at a distance. Okay. Normally, that's enough, because the rest of the system has enough elasticity in it that if there's fluctuations in demand and so forth, they cause fluctuations in prices, and people behave in a way to absorb those fluctuations, and everything is fine. This is the way the system works in normal times. But when it gets out of control, okay, when the fluctuations are too large, the imbalances are too large, the imbalances that have built up over decades of the Fed keeping interest rates too low, perhaps, or not allowing crises to wipe out the tinder that was building up in the forest, okay? When the crisis starts, it doesn't just, it's not temporary, it continues to get worse. And as it continues to get worse, the Fed's responsibility as the ultimate backstop causes it, forces it, okay, to do more and more and more, okay, until it has put a floor on the system. The reason it can put a floor on the system is because its own liabilities are the best money in the system. Ultimately, it could put the entire system on its own balance sheet. If people didn't want to hold any risky security at all, the Fed could buy them all and give them all cash for it, okay, ultimately. Now, that's the end of the market system. Really, okay? But this is at least, feasible. You could do this. You could do this. But the Fed doesn't want to do this. And it certainly doesn't want to do this just at the first indication of trouble. It keeps hoping. It keeps hoping that, we don't really have to do that much, do we? Maybe if we just do this, that'll be enough, okay? this is what the ECB is doing now, right? Let's do just enough, and maybe that will cause enough pressure because of the disequilibrium to cause politicians to do the right thing, and maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, then we'll do more, okay? And that's where we are. So we are living today through a slow motion collapse, possibly, okay, of the European system, which, you know, keep in mind what happens in these slow motion collapses. Nothing happens, every now and then there's a lot of excitement. You know, there's like bars, okay? But they're preceded by building up stresses, and that doesn't, and the crisis doesn't necessarily resolve itself for a long time. So this is the nature of the system that we're dealing with.